Okay, so here we go. Last week, the material, which was mostly the blue story, had a beginning of the first plague, the plague of Dam, the plague of blood, but it followed after the pre-plague or the demonstration of God's might. And as you will recall, God said to Moses to tell Aaron, and Moses tells Aaron, take your staff, throw it on the ground, and it became a tanin, which was we translated as water monster. So
Mm,
some kind of giant big creature from the water. Previously, the last time we saw that staff magic trick was way back when Moses was encountering God at the bush. And Moses said, how will I convince Pharaoh that you're on my side? God said, well, you see that staff you're holding? Throw it down and it will become a serpent. And then God said, grab the tail of the serpent and it became a staff. So that was where Moses learned the magic trick of a staff to a serpent.
yeah. Yeah.
Now suddenly we have the staff to a tanin rather than to a nachash. So it's a different staff or a different trick or a different person. And again, just we never actually hear in the other story of Moses doing the staff trick to Pharaoh. We have God teaching Moses the staff trick, but we never get Moses doing it to Pharaoh. Also, back in that story, you may recall God had told Moses to put his hand into his tunic, and it came out with the white snowy flakes, and then put the hand back in the tunic, and his skin was cured again. Again, those were the two magic tricks that God taught Moses at the bush that we never hear of Moses demonstrating to anybody. We never learn about Aaron learning the magic trick, but rather now suddenly Aaron does the magic trick. So
Mm,
this is where we are today. And we finished with the last week. So last week, the blue story was primarily Aaron did the magic trick, turned the staff into a tanin. Pharaoh was not impressed. So Moses says to Aaron, take your staff and hit the ground. And everything that is liquid, water, will become liquid blood. And so Aaron causes the lakes, the streams, the rivers, the ponds, the sewers, and even the stones and the wood were bleeding blood rather than condensing with water. So God said to Moses, tell Aaron. Aaron says, Moses tells Aaron. Aaron does it. And we finished that story with verse 20. ויעשו כן משה ואהרון כאשר ציווה אדוני, וירם במטה, ויך את המים אשר ביאור לעיני פרעה ולעיני עבדיו. So now Moses is going to, it says, Vayasu chen, and they did. And recall last week we had times when it was Vayas, singular, and then said Moshe and Aaron. And at times now it says Vayasu, plural. Vayasu chen, and they did. That is, they did so, or they did thus. And the they is Moshe and Aharon. Ka'asher tziva Adonai, just as had been commanded to them, just as God had commanded, that Aaron, and here it doesn't say who did it, Vayarem Bamateh, and he took hold of the staff, Vayach, and he struck et Hamayim, the water. Asher Bayaor, that was in the Nile, le'enei Pharaoh ule'enei avadav, in the sight of or to the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the sight of or to the eyes of his servants. So that's the end of last week's story with the turning waters into blood. And they were general waters, all the waters. And now one final stroke is all of the Nile is turned into water. And we don't know whether it's Aaron or Moses who's taking the staff here. If we read it after verse 19, which was after verse 13 last week, it certainly seems that it's Aaron doing the staff. But if we take verse 20 and put it at the end of our story today, it's going to seem as if it's Moses. So if you read the story in the order in which it was probably originally written, it's clearly Aaron. If you read the story in the way that the editor redactor put the story together, it now becomes the Vayarem and the Vayach, the verbs without a noun subject, only with a pronoun, become maybe it was Moses.
Mm.
So now let's look at that new blood story. Vayomer Adonai El Moshe Kabed Lev Paro Me'et Lishalach Ha'am. So verse 14, Vayomer Adonai El Moshe. And notice again who has disappeared from the story. Up until verse 13, it was Moses and Aaron, Moses and Aaron, Moses and Aaron. And now all of a sudden, verse 14, Vayomer Adonai El Moshe. God speaks to Moses. God says to Moses, Kabed Lev Paro. Heavy is the heart of Pharaoh. Kabed is heavy, but also has the word we often translate as deference, reverence, honor. Kabed et avicha, honor your father and your mother. Probably the oldest version of the song was, He's not heavy, he's my father. But we don't know, again, here, Kabed lev paro, we don't know how or why Pharaoh's heart has become something. And usually translated as hardened. But we've already seen that there is a word for hardening. There's a word for not hardening. That is kabed, and there's a word for not hardening, which is chazak, which is strong. So honored, heavy. We're not quite sure what we should do with that kabed. But whatever it is, Pharaoh's heart is now somehow me'ain l'shalach ha'am. It's not in favor of sending out the people. Me'ain, the ain ending is there is not again. Me'ain, from there is not, or from not. L'shalach ha'am, to send out the people. So it's as if we read the story 13 and then 14, we get a little bit of confusion as to whether the plague of blood has started or has not started.
Mm-mm.
But now in verse 14, it's clearly not started yet. We're back in where we left off in an older blue section where it says, Moses says to Pharaoh, my people want to leave. And Pharaoh says, forget about it. And now here again, we pick up the other side of the story, the other narrative where Moses has said it and Pharaoh says, no way. Verse 14, God then says to Moses, Lech el paro baboker, hine yotze hamaima v'nitzavta likrato al sfat hayor v'hamate asher nehafach lenachash tikach biyadecha. So now, Lech el paro, go to Pharaoh. When? baboker, in the morning. Hine yotze hamaima, behold, he is going out. Yotze, he is going out. Hamaima, towards the water. So he's going for his morning bath. Vinitzavta likrato, and you will stand to greet him. Al Sfat Hayor, on the shore of the Nile. So you get there first. Be at the Nile waiting for Pharaoh in the morning when he is going to be coming down for his morning immersion. The Hamateh asher nehefach lenachash, and the staff that you changed into, or that was changed into, a serpent. So we're back to that original bush narrative when Moses learned the magic trick, and God says to Moses, take the staff that was changed into a snake, into a nachash, tikach biadecha, you will take it in your hand. So last week in the blue story, it was very clear that it was Aaron doing the staff work. Now it's just as clear that Moses is doing the staff work. And last week, when Aaron did the staff work, it was a tanin. Now, when Moses does the staff work, it was the Nachash staff.
And what is
So one way
Nachash
of
again? Nachash is,
a serpent, a snake.
oh,
Way back when Moses threw it down and then it turned into a snake. And then Moses grabbed its tail and it became a staff again. This is the staff that Moses learned the magic trick with.
so is that Bayadecha or Bayadeach?
No, no. Remember, ach is only if it's a chet and an ah. If it's as in tikach,
Uh-huh.
then it would have been, if let's say there was an a here and then an ah, it would be tikeach. This is the only combination that changes ach, is the chet with the patach underneath it.
Oh,
This is a chaf, so it's just normal. Biadecha, in your hand. 16. Va'amarta elav, Adonai Elohei ha'ivrim, shalachani elecha, lemor, shalach et ami, v'yavduni bamidbar, v'hine lo shamata ad ko. So the Amarta, God is telling Moses, you will say, when you position yourself at the Nile on the shore as Pharaoh is coming down, and you stand there and greet him, and you have your staff in your hand, you will say, the Amarta Elav, and you will say to him, Adonai Elohei Ha'ivrim, Yud He Vav He, the gods of the Hebrews, or the God of the Hebrew. Again, the word is Hebrew plural, but usually translated as singular. The God of the Hebrews, Shalachani, has sent me. Shalach, sent, ni, me. Shalachani has sent me, Elecha, to you. Lamor, saying, this is the message that God gave me when God sent me to you. In the movie Oh God, John Denver goes to the evangelist and says, God sent me with a message for you, and God told me to tell you. This is just, that's the story of here all over again.
Mm-mm.
Moses is God's messenger, and God has given Moses exactly what to say. And we will learn out later in the book of Numbers that Bilam also says, I can only say what God tells me to say. And so Moses here only says what God's told Moses to say. And here's the message from God. Shalach et ami, send out my people, vayavduni b'midbar, and they will serve me in the midbar, in the wilderness. And again, ya'avdu, they will serve, ni, me. But here the me is God as portrayed by Moses. So Moses has carried the message. And basically, we could say Moses said, once again, God says, send out my people and they will serve me in the wilderness. And Moses says, Lo shamata ad ko. Now, what we don't know here is where to put our quotation marks. Was the message from God, send out my people and they will serve me in the wilderness, and you have not listened to me up until now? Or it was the message, send out my people and they will serve me in the wilderness? And Moses says, and behold, you have not listened to me up until now. Is Moses adding or quoting? And since we have no punctuation in the Torah, we get to decide which way we want to punctuate. Do we put single quote closed and then reopen, or do we keep the quote total?
Is
And Hebrew gives no clue other than a possible clue of the trope, which tells us when and where to put our our vocal punctuation. But
When
the
was the
trope is
trope? I
the
was curious. When was the trope first developed?
the trope was written down about 700 years uh, or 1,000 years after the close of the Torah.
So it was really the interpretation of whoever decided on the trope
Right.
where it ended.
They wrote down the trope as a received tradition of the way in which it was already being chanted when it was done
Oh,
orally.
okay.
But again, the Torah text itself gives no indication.
Yeah.
So, who invented the music? Who composed the music laning? And we don't know.
Really interesting notes.
So, we don't know where we can translate verse 16 either way.
Mm-hmm.
And then 17, Ko Amar Adonai. Now 17 picks up with thus says God, thus says Yud He Vav He, which, because again in the Torah, there's no break between the end of 16 and the verse 17. Even the division of verses is a later invention.
Mm-hmm.
And the trope gives us some indication of verse change, but again, that's possibly a later invention. So is this God said, send out my people, they will worship me. And Moses then says, behold, you have not listened to me up till now, and therefore God now says. In which case we'd have to read it, V'hine lo shamata ad ko amar. And we'd have two ko's in a row, which
Mm-hmm.
the Torah in fact has. So should we read it as ko or ko?
maybe by putting this by separating it in verses, another co had to be added, but if it wasn't separated, you would only have one co
No, because the Torah text has two
and doesn't have numbers.
and doesn't have any separation exactly.
Oh.
So the Torah text has two, and then later tradition separated the two into two separate thoughts. And possibly, V'hine lo shamata ad koko, and you have not listened to me until you had your morning hot chocolate. So ko amar Adonai. And now, thus will you, God said, thus, bezot teda ki ani Adonai
Mm.
hine anochi makeh b'mateh asher biadi al hamayim asher bayaor v'nehafchu ladam. So Moses says, Bezot, in this, Teda, you will know, Ki ani Yud He Vav He, for I am the all-powerful Yud. Hine Anochi Makeh, and again without quotes, are we still in a quote from God to Moses to tell Pharaoh, or are we now Moses adding to what God told Moses to tell Pharaoh? Moses says, For behold, I, makeh, am hitting bamateh with the staff, asher biadi, that is in my hand, al hamayim, on the water. Now you will recall in the blue text which surrounded this, it was Moses told Aaron to take the staff and hit. And now Moses is saying, I'm hitting. It's my staff. So are there two blood plagues happening? Are there two separate stories happening? If we read it as one continuous text, then it seems like water was turned into blood twice, once by Aaron and once by Moses. If we read it as the two separate stories, then in one story, Aaron makes the blood. In this story, Moses makes the blood. So hine anochi makeh b'mateh asher biadi. So behold, I am striking the with my staff that is in my hand, al hamayim asher bayaor, on the water that is in the Nile. Again, Yaor, I think really we just need to translate as Nile so we keep track of geography. I'm going to hit the water. I am hitting the water. Venafchu ladam, and it turned, and they turned because Mayim is plural, and they turned to blood. So that's why nechu is plural. The u ending tells us it's plural. So I hit the Mayim, the waters, and they turned to blood. The waters of the Nile, and they, the waters, turned to blood. So actually, it's not the Nile turned to blood, but the waters turned to blood.
Which makes sense because the
Yes.
water will then go out into the ocean and the new water will be clean.
Well, the new water will continue to be replaced because the
Ah,
water of the Nile just keep turning into blood. Every time they cross the border down in southern Egypt, the water changes from water to blood.
how do we know? Not just the immediate.
Well, because it doesn't say this, it doesn't say this water. It says the waters.
I see. Okay.
So all the water that comes in into the Nile turns into blood. And the consequence of this blood, verse 18, V'hadaga asher bayaor tamut, uva'ash hayaor, v'nil'u Mitzrayim, lishtot mayim min hayaor. So hadaga, dag is fish.
Oh,
Hadaga would be just a very emphatic the fish, the fishies. Asher bayaor, that are in the Yaor, in the Nile, tamut, will die. And the fish, and notice in Hebrew, dog, fish is singular, just as in English, fish is singular, but fish is also plural. So it's not like one fish is going to die, but the fish, as the generic groupings of sea animals, will die, which is interesting, I think, here because it doesn't say anything about the other water creatures.
Hmm.
Doesn't say the frogs died, doesn't say the turtles died, doesn't say the crocodiles died, doesn't say the hippopotami died, just the fish. The
One fish,
fish,
two fish, red fish, blue fish.
yes, except now they're all dead fish. One fish, two fish, dead fish, that's all.
Dead fish, all fish.
Yes. So the fish died. And what happens when all the fish died? Uva'ash hayor, and the Nile was stinky. Va'ash is stink up, stank, stunk. So the Nile turned into a giant sewage plant. V'nil u Mitzrayim lishtot mayim min hayor. V'nil u and was loathsome, or they loathed. Who's the they? Mitzrayim. Egypt loathed lishtot mayim to drink water min hayor from the Nile. So it seems like initially it's only the Nile that turns into blood, and you can't go and drink from the Nile. And then we get verse 19 and the first half of verse 20, which is thrown in from last week, way up here.
Mhm.
And then after that, we have Vayafku kol hamayim asher bayor ladam. Then, and was, again, they plural, and they were turned, all the water that was in the Nile, to blood. And of course, that would mean all the irrigation ditches from the Nile would turn into blood because the water of the ditches came from the Nile.
Hmm.
But last week it was the ponds, the lakes, the streams, all sources of water, and all things that seeped out water like rocks and wood.
Hmm.
But here it's only water from the Nile that turns into blood. So we have two separate stories, or one continuous story that we have to figure out what we're going to do about it. And that is this week.
Wow.
Next week, after the fish all die and the water turns to blood, with one little insert from back in the blue story, which follows up on Aaron turned everything into blood, we're going to see that Pharaoh's heart is chazak, is strengthened, is strong. But in the red story, we generally don't have that. We have a different approach. So once again, you can read next week from the red, the end of this half of 22, straight to the verse of 23, and see if you, when you look at the translation, see if really blue added anything to the story, or did it change the story by putting it in?
Hmm.
Was the story consistent from the second half of 22 to the beginning of 23? So that will be as you look along. And then next week, we get introduced to a consequence of all this dead fish and these red bloody waters. And that's going to be our wonderful, down here, the last word, the Tzfardeim, which when we do the plague in the Haggadah, it's Sfardeia, singular.
Oh.
But in the text, it's Sfardeim, plural. And we can translate it as frogs, which we usually do. but it really is sort of the non-fish water dwellers, the amphibians. So the place is going to be overrun by amphibians. So here's your reading for next week. The Hadaga Asher Bayaor Meta Vayivash Hayaor Velo Yachlu Mitzrayim Lishtot Mayim Min Hayaor Vayahi Hadam Bechol Eretz Mitzrayim. 22. Vayasu Chen Chartumei Mitzrayim Belatehem. And then we have a comment with the verse, other half of the verse. Vayechazak lev paro v'lo shama alehem ka'asher diber Adonai. 23. Vayifen paro vayavo el beito v'lo shat libo gam lazot. 24. Vayach Peru kol Mitzrayim sevivot hayaor mayim lishtot ki lo yachlu lishtot mimei hayaor. And again, as you read and follow along and look at the translation, you'll see it's the Nile water that's the blood, that's the problem. 25. V'yamale shivat yamim Acharei hakot Adonai et hayaor. 26. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, bo el paro, va'amarta elav, ko amar Adonai, shalach et ami vayavduni, which is the same message we keep getting Moses is supposed to transmit. Verse 27. Ve'im ma'en ata l'shaleach, and there's that ach, that's the form that ach comes in. Ve'im ma'e ata l'shaleach, hine anochi nogef et kol gvulcha b'tzfardiim. V'sharatz hayaor tzfardiim va'alu uva'u Bavetecha uvachadar mishkavcha la'al mitatecha uvavet avadecha uva'amecha uvatanurrecha uvamish'arotecha. So these frogs are all over the place. Lots of fun words to deal with.
Ribbit, ribbit.
Yes, the frogs are Beitecha, Chadar Mishkavcha, on the Mitatecha, in the Beit Avadecha, in the Amecha, in the Tanur Recha, in the Misharotecha. Lots of great things in verse 28. Verse 29, Uvacha v'amcha uvachol avadecha ya'alu hatzfardeim. And those are everywhere. Any questions or anything on the separation of the singular text into the two strains or the two narratives?
Is there any relationship between the word hats for our deim and Sephardim?
No. No, Sfardeim, Sfardea has an ayin.
Oh,
Who was called the frogs?
Although, I mean, yeah, again, one can always play with etymology.
Mhm.
And the Sfardim are from Sepharad, from Spain.
Mhm.
And so one can play with the ayin, put the ayin in Sepharad, and Spain was known as the place for frogs.
Well, weren't the French called frogs because they ate frogs?
Well, I mean, there's a pejorative language used for lots of different people.
Mhm.
The Sephardim are the Spanish, not the French.
Right. I understand that.
So you can play with it, but I don't think it's there.
Yeah.
Especially since Farad is a much later term that is knowing about Spain.
Oh,
So I keep looking at the word Hadaggah, and I realize recapitulation of this whole story is the Haggadah.
Right.
Yes, and certainly from a numerological or a any kind of wordplay where words are interpolated, and you can read the Torah text from a lot of fun play. You can change except that it's Haggadah and Hadaggah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yes, one can play with that and say, if it were not for the fish, we wouldn't have had to tell the story. If Pharaoh had given up on the blood, we wouldn't need Passover.
Is that why we have gefilte fish?
That's why we have gefilte fish on Passover. We have Hadaggah on Haggadah time.